Sports card hobby family, welcome to the first episode. Inside the Mind of is going to be the name of this series that I'm going to do, and it's going to be different types of collectors in the community, some of them content creators, some of them not, but I'm excited to add this to the portfolio of content. And my New Year's resolution to you heading into 2025 is we will maintain Alf. Even though he has not really spent a lot of time talking on the channel, unfortunately, Alf, you're a big part of what we do here. We appreciate you, and you're not going anywhere, my friend. Before we dive into today's conversation with Ryan, vintage card collector, big thanks to today's video sponsor, Pristine Auction. Hourly auctions, weekly auctions, monthly auctions, 10-minute auctions. They've got live auctions, all sorts of things going on over there. Pristine, it's sports cards, it's non-sports, sports memorabilia, and all sorts of pop culture items. You don't want to miss it over at Pristine. $10 off your first auction victory over there with the Sports Card Dad promo. I've got a link down below that will take you to Pristine. Search away and find some cool stuff in 2025. All right, Frank, let's get to the conversation. Roll it. Roll it. Thank you.
All right. Today, I am lucky. I feel very fortunate. I've got Ryan back on the channel, Ryan McClanahan from History Through Cards Shortcut. That's the full name of the channel, the YouTube channel. Make sure to check out Ryan's channel. Ryan, how the heck are you? It's been too long.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Yeah.
Have you had a good holiday season?
It kind of flies by. It really does. But yeah, it's been really good. Cardboard wise, it's been really good too.
Okay, good. Well, I've titled this episode is Inside the Mind of a Vintage Card Collector, and you were the first person that I thought of when I thought of vintage card collector. One of my longtime hobby friends, really, as long as I've been doing YouTube. We've been in contact for a while now, but I feel like I don't get a chance to talk to you enough. So I'm glad that we're able to do this episode. And I've got some questions for you. I just want to pick your brain, kind of open-ended questions to get inside your head a little bit, as obviously our sports card hobby has changed dramatically over really the last 5 years and then really over the decades for sure. So the first question I have for you is, as it sits today, and I guess kind of going back in time, what excites you about vintage cards in particular?
The thrill of the hunt, really, for me. I haven't seen every single card. I don't know everything that's out there. So every time I go to a show, honestly, I don't know what's going to be there. And also, I think too, for a lot of vintage collectors, there's an element of history with the card or the player that they're looking for too.
Yeah, most definitely. What about, and that's something, especially on your channel, whether it's in written form or in videos on your website and on your YouTube channel, you're definitely an historian. You're a hobby historian for sure. I mean, you're one of the few people that I know that can really go into detail on, the history of the hobby and then how that ties into U.S. history, for example, or maybe even, European history. How has, so let's actually just kind of seg over with YouTube. You've been doing YouTube now, and also you're writing your blog for years as well. Has that changed at all for you in 2024?
It's kind of I'm actually right in the middle of writing 3 books, and so I haven't had a whole lot of time to do a lot of videos. The books actually I'm writing are about the American Tobacco Company and the T205, T206, and T207, and how they correlate with history, the law, and everything associated with those particular cards and the players. So that's kind of an eating up my time. I do get a couple of videos out there when I can. So, it's for me, actually, I know a lot of people on YouTube, they have a kind of a hard time trying to find out or figure out what to put in their video. For me, it's the exact opposite. There's just so much out there that I have to kind of make a list, and it's never ending. It really is. So
now, when you talk about thrill of the hunt for vintage cards, are these sets that maybe you haven't ever seen before, or ones that you know about but maybe the cards don't pop up often, like just lesser known sets maybe from food companies or Because obviously there's tobacco cards, and there's so much variety among the tobacco cards and different, some are short printed. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but as I've, sat with, some of the REA guys talking through auctions and learning more about that world is endless. It feels like, as far as what's possible, it doesn't even seem like all the sets are even, well, like they're not all known. I'm not even sure if all of them are known.
Yeah, they're not. And up to a couple of years ago, they kind of thought that tobacco cards in particular were issued in maybe the mid to late 1880s. That's not actually the case. Tobacco cards actually started out, we now know, in June of 1877, and so there is really no way for us to know how many cards are out there, how many sets are out there, and they're always finding new cards and players that they didn't know were issued with a card. So, and that seems to be like every year. Yeah, it's really, to me, it's really fascinating because I don't know what's out there, and so when I go to a show, I try not to have a list. I always have like a notepad with me, and I'm always taking photographs and just writing down stuff and just trying to do as much research as possible.
Well, let's go. I was going to ask you about card shows in particular. What, in your mind, what makes for a good card show? And do you have a favorite card show, whether it be locally or regionally or nationally?
Yeah, so I do have a favorite card show outside of the national. The Shiner show is probably the one I've gone to the longest, starting in the 1990s. And I've only missed maybe 2 or 3 of those. And
Wow.
so I try never to miss a card show, particularly because of the people. Part of the hobby is interacting with people, and I love to hear other stories of collectors, what they have in their collection. Sometimes it gives me like really great ideas too, just to hear their stories.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you're in the New England area. Is that that's always? It feels like that's always been a hotbed for card collectors and dealers. It seems like New York, just kind of in that general area where you are. It just feels like there's a lot of hobbyists in that vicinity. Is that something to where, like, are there a lot of old collections that pop up there? Is that what I guess kind of makes Shriners a good spot, because there is kind of these hidden gems that are found, or is it just all over the country, and not necessarily there?
So I don't know about all over the country. I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of the caramel cards are still in Pennsylvania because that's caramel country. It used to be. From Massachusetts, where I am now, Massachusetts has a distinction of having at least 5 companies that issued sports cards between like 1910 and 1941. Gaudy in particular, a U.S. caramel company, and I think like a few others. But a lot of the dealers I've noticed that are at the Shriners, they're usually older guys, and they usually don't like to travel outside of, say, New England. So I tend to see the same cards year in, year out, and one of the things that I've really kind of noticed over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, is the prices of a lot of this stuff. Specifically, the Shriners that I went to in November, I was astounded by the asking prices of a lot of these vintage cards, and I kind of like had to take a step back and just kind of like ask myself, like, okay, like, what are you doing? Like, what specifically do you're right. I'm trying to see. Oh, so one card in particular that I've always wanted in my collection, but for some reason I could never afford it. was this particular card right here. And this was not cheap, but I figured, you know what, like once I purchase it, it's not going anywhere. So and this is Wee Willie Keeler, and so I always have like a mind for history, you know, and when I'm looking at these cards too, it's just not about the ball players or the game itself. I mean, baseball in particular, it is it is a game that mirrors American society at any given era too. So, you know,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Especially and I know you've talked about it on your channel, and obviously Jackie Robinson's civil rights movement is that's always what's talked about a lot. But there's a lot more to it than just that. There's all sorts of history tied to baseball going back in time. So you're right. It's very interesting. What does a typical, okay, so I know you collect baseball, football, basketball, and a variety, you collect a variety of different sports. So how do you zero in, focus in, and has that changed? Does it change, you know, to where you're really into something? Because I find myself doing this, you know, to where I get into something and then I want to get into something else, and I've got to make decisions as to, you know, okay, well, maybe I need to sell some of these to pay for that type thing. Does that happen to you, or do you just have are you better at planning than me?
I so when you're at a show, no matter the amount of planning that you do for it, there's really, I think, no amount of planning truly that because you can go into a show having a thought about this is what I want, and whatever you want might not be there. Or something may be there that you didn't even think of, and then all of a sudden you have to think of, okay, like my plans they just got, you know, screwed up, and now I have to think about, okay, I want this particular card, but now I have to figure out like it maybe how do I go about purchasing it, and do I have to sell something in order to, you know, get this particular card. Some cards you can actually get away with just ignoring because they're not rare; they're just expensive. But other cards are expensive and rare, or they're rare and then, you know, like it just, there's a lot of factors that go into this too. So it really depends on the card and the player too, you know.
Now you have graded cards, but I know that you also have bought a lot of ungraded cards over the years. I remember at the National, we were walking around going back a couple of years, and you were smelling cards, and, you know, really like you were locked in on condition and that sort of thing. You know, it's such an interesting game, kind of the ungraded versus graded, because I do feel like, and I'm sure there's probably dealers that, you know, if you have relationships and that sort of a thing, that work with you, but it just feels like it's tough to find an ungraded vintage card for, I guess, depends on the card. Really depends on the card. But I remember when we were looking together, I was looking for a Bart Starr rookie card in particular, which I have it on my desk, the one that I ended up buying. But we were looking around, and, you know, the raw copies, they were priced basically kind of where I felt like you would pay the graded. It was like the graded price, you know, so it was almost kind of like, and there wasn't enough copies that really looked the part too. I remember the National, there's not a shortage. I mean, there's a lot of copies, but finding kind of the one that you're looking for any particular, I guess, post-war card, depends on what we're talking about here, but they were around, but just finding the one that was the fit, it was actually few and far between, even though there's obviously tons of cards at the National.
Yeah. So I found because I had to branch out into different avenues of collecting over like the last couple of years. So normally I'm into like baseball, but I'm also like into like hockey, golf, tennis, boxing, cricket, and vintage soccer. And a lot of those cards are not graded, right? Especially the cricket and the vintage soccer stuff. So you know, like I just I I don't know, actually, what was the what were you kind of saying there?
It just felt like it was tough to find, deals on, buying ungraded. It was kind of a tricky thing to see, like, oh, I'm going to buy this ungraded card because I would want to grade it out, and not necessarily not necessarily because, oh, it's, it looks like I'm getting an 8 for the price of a 4. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but it was almost like the prices were so similar. There wasn't any sort of a discount on the ungraded version. So it's kind of like, and I wasn't looking for a high grade necessarily. It was like a 5 tops, maybe a 6 if the price was right. But that was really like, for the Bard Star rookie, the 6 was the top of the budget. And I ended up with an SGC 4 because I was looking at this 4, and the 4 actually looked better than the 6 that I was looking at. So I ended up going with the 4, so it saved me money going that route.
Yeah, so I appeal is like everything in vintage for the most part. I'm actually noticing that too, where when I first started into vintage, it was about 1994 or so, and grading really wasn't a thing. So and actually dealers didn't really trust it, collectors didn't either.
Yeah.
And so it took a couple of years to get graded cards into the mainstream.
I know, it's funny. PSA was looked at back then because I remember I was a teenager. I didn't see very many of them, but I saw some of them, and I remember like PSA was viewed back then as like some of these, like 3rd or 4th rate grading companies that we look at now. We're like, what is that slab? What is that? Like, we're not buying that. That was basically PSA.
They essentially started out in 1991 with the Gretzky McNow Wagner, and that ended up being basically through fraud. And so the dealers didn't know how to price the PSA cards, the graded cards, and collectors like me, I'd go and see a raw card like this, and then I'd see another one that was graded, and I'd be like, well, why would I want to buy a graded card? I don't know how to sell it. And then, it's twice or 3 times as much as the raw copy. And, another aspect to this too is that we would kind of generally have to like buy what was available at the time. Regardless, I guess and it depends on rarity too. So I have no problem with graded cards, and I don't really have much of a problem with raw either. I'm very comfortable with raw, and it really depends on how comfortable you are with raw cards and what your knowledge base is, and everybody has a different knowledge base when it comes to the hobby and collecting and how to actually grade cards themselves. When I was a kid back in the 80s, we had to kind of like go through Beckett and do this ourselves because the dealers weren't exactly going to be upfront with us for the most part. And so like that's been kind of like taken away from through grading, just kind of like how to grade each card. So I don't think as an economic standpoint, you can have 2 sets of financials, prices for the same card. That never really made any sense to me. Why you would do that. So like if this card is like $10 and the graded card is like $30, like how do you actually go about finding out what you should be actually paying for this particular card? That I think that's one of the drawbacks of PSA or grading,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been thinking about that for 80s cards in particular, and I've had to check myself a little bit for certain cards. I'm trying to think of an example. One example is I bought, going back a few months ago, an 89 Hoops Michael Jordan card, and that's just a classic. That's the David Robinson rookie set, that I've got it in an SGC 10. because it's a little bit cheaper than the PSA 10. I think the SGC 10 was like $60 and the PSA 10 is, I don't know, $100 or something, or $120 for it. And I was thinking, like, that's such a classic card from my youth. That would just be fun to have. But then I'm kind of like I had a few different copies of 89 score Barry Sanders rookie card in a PSA 9. I had 3 copies of it. And then I started to think, like, why do I have, because I want other things. I was kind of looking at my collection. Where can I let some things go? And then it was like, well, which cards can I get back whenever I want? And that was one. And I also have that complete set in a binder. I have the 89 score football set in a binder. So I have that card that I can just flip through and look at it. And it got me thinking, like, I really need to sit down and focus on, for anything that is from, the 80s and 90s sets, that are fairly common cards. Like, do I need that in a 10? Or can I just enjoy it the way that it is in a binder? Because that's how I enjoy it, as a kid. You have those binders, or you have like your best cards in the binder and you flip through and you're looking at them, type thing. And so I shifted my mindset a little bit there to where it was like, okay, I don't need to pay up necessarily for those cards. I do still have that SGC 10 Jordan. I'll keep that one, but I decided against kind of, putting together a set of those in 10s. Like, it's like, why am I doing that? It made sense at the time. But again, it was like, I should probably, I could use that money, pull it together and get into other things.
Yeah. Financially, you kind of like have to step back and ask yourself, does this make sense for me to get a 9 or a 10? For me personally, I don't know the difference between a 9 and a 10 anyway.
Right.
And so I truly don't understand some of the economics behind somebody's thoughts on buying a 9 or a 10. It may be different if they're trying to complete a set, but like, I'm not out there buying sets individually cards, buying individual cards for sets. I'm not entirely sure how many people can actually do that today too. It's especially in modern too. I mean, going forward, it's just it's going to be very, very difficult. Maybe the smaller stuff, but
yeah, that particular card, the 89 score Barry Sanders, that's one of my all-time favorite hobby cards. And so that might be one where I buy an SGC 10 or a PSA 10 as kind of an exception to the rule. But if I go back to 2019, that was a card where it sat there on eBay all day, every day in 2018, 2019 for about $300 to $400 in a PSA 10. All day, whenever you wanted to get one, they were there. And so I never rushed to do it. I was like, it'll be there, just like a lot of these cards.
Yeah.
Then 2020, 2021 hit, and I haven't checked it recently, but it's stuck for years at about $1,100, $1,200, $1,300. And I'm like, I just can't pay $1,200, $1,300 for that card when it was a $300 card 5 years ago. And they're common, it's not like it's a rare card, even in a 10, right. I mean, they're out there. So,
yeah, it's so like, for a lot of stuff from like the 1970s and 1980s and the 1960s, this stuff is out there. Even the 1950s is not rare. Very few cards, if they're not regional issues, you can find. So, like, it's, obviously it's up to the individual collector and what they want their collection to look like. And for me, I'm all over the place. And so, I see tendencies from modern collectors that I saw back in the 1980s and 1990s. So it's the hobby is really kind of like spinning around, in a lot of ways. The only difference I think is the technology is different.
Do you think? Because it also, and again, I was born in 81, so I was still a kid when it was really hot. I mean, between 88 and 94 was really when I was into it the most. So, I mean, that's, we're talking like 7 to 13. I was pretty young and didn't really necessarily know the industry side of things. Then I was just going to my card shop and going and buying packs and that sort of a thing. But I do remember one of my buddy's dads had stacked boxes and boxes of 89 score football. And he was actually a high school football coach. And I remember thinking like, my God, this guy is rich. You know, he's got it. And they were stuffed in his closet. He's got all this 89 score and it was so incredible. But it feels like and I understand inflation and everything, but it feels like there's bigger pockets in it now, deeper pockets in it nowadays.
Yeah.
And I understand, you know, there's the video today that I made was about one of one black finite cards. They're kind of, you know, the lotto tickets everyone's searching for. But I don't want to take away from the coolness of the card. I also don't want to take away from the chase part. It's like kind of what you mentioned with, you know, the chase of finding unique vintage cards and that sort of a thing. I can understand the mind of a modern collector because I can I do a little bit of both. I've got vintage cards and I've got certain modern things. I don't like how far we've gone towards the gambling side of everything, but honestly, it's society. It's society. I mean, like the leagues literally have sponsors that are sports betting companies. So I don't know like what else you can really do there. You know, I mean, if the leagues are in on it, I mean, you know, it's just a part of our new world now.
Yeah, I mean, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, he's got to be spinning in his grave right now, you know, because he would have banned everybody today. I mean, you know, so like with sports betting, we've had such a hard.
Explain who that is, Ryan, for audience that doesn't know who that is.
Oh, okay. So Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He was brought in after the 1919 World Series scandal, in which eight quote unquote Black Sox or the White Sox ended up they bet on their team to lose, and they were banned from baseball. And so we've seen that, you know, throughout the 1900s, and you know that it's just had devastating consequences throughout like the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and in other sports as well. Basketball, they had a huge point shaving scandals from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and not just in professional sports, but in college basketball. I think Boston College back in like the mid 1980s. They had a point shaving scandal as well, and so I'm not a big fan of gambling or introducing gambling into the hobby. I just think it sets a bad precedent for kids. To tell you the truth.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the obvious first step is. I just wish all breaking companies would take that particular stance of requiring that their customers are 18, having some sort of verification in place. I understand that it's not required, you know, of them.
I think it will be.
Yeah, but it would be great for them just to get ahead of it, just because I believe it's just the right thing. I think that would be a great step, you know, and companies that do it, I would say, okay, you know, good job. Good on you.
Yeah, I think so. Like in one of my videos, I did a video on the 1973 Hobbies Act, and so that actually has to do with like coinage and stuff. But you know, all it takes is one legislator or one Congress member who has nothing better to do than, you know, to like have someone's angry mother as a constituent go up and say like, hey, little Jimmy just spent like $800 on a break or whatever the case may be, and you know, there's all your fun, you know, and they'll legislate this stuff through every state's legislature eventually, I think. So I think maybe like the breakers need to kind of tread lightly on this subject. Because, you know, Congress really doesn't have a whole lot to do these days, you know, and legislators are just looking for attention too, you know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and maybe nothing will happen for a while. Like, I mean, who knows? I mean, I guess we'll have to see. It's been going on for 10 years, really solid. The business has been pretty strong for, I guess, 8 years or so. But yeah, you know, we'll see how it goes. I think that would be a good thing for sure.
Yeah, it would have never flown when I was a kid. You know, back in the
Oh yeah,
1980s.
it was like the 80s. It was like gambling is terrible, and it was dare. You know, it was like the war on drugs. Like
Exactly.
nothing would. Yeah, that would not have flown at all in 1988.
Yeah, I saw a video quite recently of a girl who did a deal with an adult. She was a teenage girl. She did this, like, I want to say it was like a $800 deal with an adult. That wouldn't have flown at all. There's no way. I couldn't even sell some of my. I had some 1990, I think 1991 Upper Deck. Frank Thomas. I kept on pulling that specific card, so I had 5 of them, and I went to my dealer, and he's like, I can't buy these off you. And I'm like, why not? I'm like, well, first off, he's like, he's not as popular as you think. And I was like, what? Frank Thomas. And second off, he was like, you have 5 of them, so like it's supply and demand. That's one thing that the hobby does, I think, really well, or it can do really well, is teach people about supply and demand and basic economics too.
I don't know though. It's so complicated because I feel like it's more complex economics in our hobby because
well, it is now. Yeah, I'm again,
because
I'm talking 30 years.
Oh yeah. We, even with all the information we have now that we did not have with the internet, now we have at least the internet where we can try to see what's, the past or the recent sales are on cards. Back then you were really flying blind. But now, even with all the information we have, it still feels like it's so complex that the demand side of the hobby is so hard to quantify. And it feels like it changes, it moves around, and, there's certain things that, there's certain triggers that, that happen, that'll, we have, a death, it'll be, it was Ricky Henderson. We got Willie Mays. And
high speed trading.
Yeah. It's
high speed trading. Yeah.
It's wild. It's wild. One thing I wanted to ask you is, do you feel, and this is something that, when I look at, I've been actually studying a little bit more on the Pokemon card side lately, trying to understand that market for sealed product. I've been buying some of that sealed products. I'm getting in on the Rudy Alpha Investments game plan and sucking away some of that sealed product. But that generation is mostly, it's like an opposite demo. It's like 40 and under is most of the Pokemon folks. But half of my card show is now Pokemon. It's only growing at my card show. And so when I look at vintage card collectors, of course, I know plenty of people that are my age and younger that collect vintage cards, but the vast majority of vintage card collectors I know are probably 50 plus. If I'm 45 plus, I think 45 plus is probably safe. Not as many of the younger generation. Now, if you go back, I think I shared this with you too, that documentary that's on YouTube, Cardboard Dreams, that where the kid, it's like a high school senior that goes around, he interviews people. If you haven't, I know you've seen it, but I'll send it to you if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's a time capsule. It's literally it's like an 18-year-old that's going around with a video camera and interviewing people, and they're saying the exact same stuff.
Is that from 1990?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you. I'm sure you've seen it because I think I've sent it to you, but if not, I will send it to you. Check it out because it is a literal time capsule. You'll be like, whoa, it takes you back. And you have a lot of the guys saying, the kids these days, they're just, all they care about is the money. They're all investors. This is in 1990.
Don Mattingly, Don Gooden.
Yeah. They're like, these kids don't want to buy the Willie. They don't want to spend a little bit more for Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays. They want Don Mattingly or they want Jose Canseco. I know. I wish I'd bought the Willie Mays back then.
And so I just bought this the other day.
What card is that?
It's a 1985 Donruss wax box. It came on the bottom of the box. You had to cut them out. But I kind of grew up with Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry here, and so a lot of the guys that I grew up with, a lot of the cards back then are really interesting that I couldn't afford. Yeah. So 35, 40 years later, I'm kind of like grabbing up a lot of this stuff, and a lot of it's not that expensive for the most part. It used to be, but yeah, it's really interesting that
Well, and those dealers, they'll be like, I don't understand why people won't spend $100 or $200 for Willie Mays. They'd rather spend $20 or $30 on Don Mattingly. But I remember when I was a kid, and granted, I grew up in a very middle class home. We did not have any money for cards. An expensive card for me, I remember my dad bought me of 86 Topps Phil Simms, and it was like $4. And it was like, instead of me buying the packs, I got that Phil Simms card. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got this 86 Topps Phil Simms. And this is back, of course, this is Phil Simms' heyday, with the Giants. He was hot back then. That was the hot QB. That was a Justin Herbert, back then it was Phil Simms. But I remember thinking, like, this is so unbelievable that I have this 86 Topps Phil Simms. It wasn't, his rookie's like 80 Topps. I think it's 1980 Topps as a rookie.
Yeah.
It wasn't even close to being a rookie, but the thought that my dad would think to spend $200 on a piece of cardboard, even if it was Mickey Mantle. I mean, that's why nobody did it, because it was just unheard of to spend that amount of money on a card.
Yeah. So I always had a limit on what I would pay for a card, and that was $200. I can't do that anymore. Some of the cards back here that you can see.
I was going to say, you got some nice ones back there.
Yeah. The Wilt Chamberlain rookie, I only paid $200 for it. Yeah, back in 2007.
Those were the days.
Oh my God! So here's the thing: what you're saying really is generational, right? So, my dad would, if he knew what the cards that he grew up with were worth now, I think he'd be very shocked. And in fact, Jefferson Burdick, he had said in one of his writings that he was looking for other collectors like him who remembered the players in the cards from like 1910, the T205, T206. And he said that it wouldn't do any good to ask, say, my grandfather's generation, the greatest generation, about these ball players, because they were too young or they didn't grow up with them. And Burdick did, like the guys you can see right there, Joe Tinker, right? So it's really kind of generational, where you saw in that documentary from 1990, and the dealers asking again, how come these kids aren't going after Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or whoever? Is one of the reasons why is because they didn't grow up with them. They didn't see them play. Guys like me, right? I would have been one of those kids back in the 1990s. Same with you. So we never saw them play, but we did see Don Mattingly or Doc Gooden, Dale Strawberry, Wade Boggs, whoever. So that's one reason. The other reason too is because we didn't have the money for a lot of those cards, and I always tried to find ways to actually grab vintage when I was a teenager. So I actually would go and try to mow lawns and stuff for extra cash. But a lot of these kids didn't know who the players were, and I think I've told you in the past, one of the reasons why I went to vintage was because I had a teacher who she took us to a card store to learn about math and problem solving skills, and that's where I saw tobacco cards for the very first time. And I really wanted to find out who these ball players were. And I was just really enthralled by the cards themselves and the artwork and everything. And you really kind of have to have a mindset that where you want to actually learn about this stuff. And I'm not entirely sure how many kids today or teenagers are interested or modern collectors. I just don't know. I was unusual back then. I am now too. So
do you think, one thing I think about as well, if we go back to 1990, and you had kind of those young folks, kind of dads getting their boys into it. It was mostly, boys, some girls, of course, but I just remember it was like every boy in class was into cards back then. But it was still kind of a similar deal in the sense that, like, when they were buying packs in 60s, let's just say, it was still kind of the same function of you're going to the grocery store, the gas station, or whatever to get packs. Now it's a completely different animal. Do you think given all the serial numbered cards and just I guess just the youth getting used to serial numbered cards, do they look at vintage and say, like, well, like, it's not serial numbered, it's not it's not shiny, is it unless they respect just the history of the game. If they're a baseball person, like Babe Ruth, legend, Mickey Mantle, like Lou Gehrig, all these guys, Jackie Robinson, I think there's always going to be interest in that sense. Someone wanting to own, like, man, these are the guys that started it all, but will it be at the same level, I guess? Will the youth kind of grow up and it be what it is today and what it used to be?
I don't know the answer to that, and I really wish I did, because when I first started out, I didn't see really too many teenage vintage card collectors out there. I don't know, like, obviously, like, there's the modern stuff, like, so I haven't watched really any sports since what, 94. So here and there I have. There's like two generations.
The Celtics win a title.
Huh?
Hopefully you got the Celtics winning a title this last year.
I did, but I didn't watch any of it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So the guys that I grew up with, like, say, Cal Ripken Jr., I saw a lot of him, and there's now two generations of ball players that I just haven't seen, cards that I haven't seen either, modern cards, that is. So I'm completely lost.
So you're in a tunnel. You're in tunnel vision. Hey, that might be good though.
Yeah, I'm like what, Rip Van Winkle, but in the reverse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, and that's like one of the reasons why I watch your channel and a few others, because I don't know really a whole lot about modern. The thing is, like, I do go to shows and I do see this stuff, and I'm just amazed that it's like the junk wax era 2.0. It's just another take on what was going on back in the 80s and the 90s, with the exception. So, like, Leaf and, like, Don Russ, I think, are Upper Deck. Those companies, I think they really started this stuff and they just never stopped. But the one of one stuff economically, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because usually, like, I know you talked to Dr. Beckett, and he had a mathematical formula that he based these cards on, and in order to, like, do that properly, you have to have sales of the same card more than once, and to have an accurate basis on where to go forward. You can't do that with a one of one. That's very, very tough.
Yeah, I've heard the argument with the variety of parallels. A lot of people will focus on, well, if you have 100 different parallels, then you're just going to kind of dilute everything and water it down. The other side of that argument is, well, if you're a young person, or if you're just the average Joe, you don't get the one of one. Well, you have opportunities to get your player in different colors of the rainbow, I suppose. So, maybe you're not collecting all those, but if I want Drew Brees, but I can't afford the gold out of 10 or the tie-dye out of 25 or whatever, I can get the purple out of 50 or something if that fits my price point. So I guess maybe from a collecting standpoint, it makes it to where everybody can get something, but it's kind of a tricky balance there, because money, there's always money tied in there, to some degree, people. Yeah.
And so, what I started to notice too, like, so I worked at a card shop when I was a teenager as well. And I learned a lot about. I wasn't really collecting modern cards after '94, but I learned a lot from this the owner and the shop. And um, one thing that really kind of angered a lot of people back in say 95, 96, 97 was that the packs, and I saw it, firsthand. The packs were going. Well, there's usually started out at about maybe 35, 40 cents and 50 cents by the time the 1980s stopped. And then Stadium Club, I think, was the first set that I can remember that ended up jumping up to like $1.50 to $5 a pack. And then you had Topps Finest, and that jumped up to about, I think, like $10 or so. And then
Do you remember Action Packed Football? I
I
remember
do.
those were,
Yeah.
man, those were sweet cards for the time. They were so different because they were embossed, they were kind of like three-dimensional. But man,
Yeah.
those were, I remember that Emmitt Smith rookie in 1990 Action Packed with a little the red R in the corner. That was a really cool. I remember the card shows, everybody was trying to get those. And that was a $50 card in 1990, 91 at card shows, ungraded.
Yeah, some of the cards back here, the Mario Lemieux card, and who else do I have? Joe Montana rookie there. Those were just really out of my price range. Even the Frank Thomas Leaf and the Mike Piazza from like the '92 Bowman. Those are cards I could never ever afford just because they were just, and those guys are also playing. They were active as well. And so once a player retires or gets in the Hall of Fame or goes on to the Field of Dreams, the generations coming up, they're not really interested in those guys too. And so that also kind of drives the price down too.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick up Frank Thomas 1990 Leaf, I think, for like $10 or so, maybe $20. Get them to sign it for like $100, and there you go. But yeah, it's definitely generational, and my thoughts are definitely with the time in which I started collecting, and today too, with the modern stuff. It's so hard to keep track of this stuff. It truly is. And I really struggle with it. I admire people who want to collect modern stuff, but I look at it and I'm like, where do I start? I have no
Right.
idea. I have no idea who these players are, and I was at a show. I didn't know it was a modern show, and there was really no vintage. Actually, it's the show that I picked up the Mario Lemieux rookie here, just by happenstance. I looked around and all I saw was like these little kids, and they were they knew exactly what they wanted, what they were looking for, and who the players were, and I felt so out of my league.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's definitely a different time. It's a different world than when we were growing up. That's for sure. All right. We're going to wrap up here soon. I've got one question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
Is there one card in particular in 2025 as we move forward into the new year, one card that's kind of on the target list for you that you can share?
Yeah. So that would be a 1954 Topps Ernie Banks rookie.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I've always wanted it, and I could, for some reason, it always slipped through my cardboard fingers.
Well, awesome, man. Well, hey, Ryan, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate the conversation, hanging out with
Thank you.
a vintage card collector, getting inside the mind of Ryan McClanahan. This was fun. Guys, check out Ryan's YouTube channel, History Through Cards, and it is History Through Cards Shortcut is the name of the channel, but it is a treasure trove of card history, but also just how history ties in to sports. It's amazing, and cardboard. It's very good.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
All right, Ryan. We'll talk to you later. See you
All
guys.
right.